In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, humanity's survival depends not on the superhuman might of gene-enhanced space marines or the esoteric powers of sanctioned psychers, but on the grinding weight of countless ordinary men and women who stand between civilization and oblivion. Among these defenders, few face a more brutal existence than the tank crews of the Astra Militarum, the soldiers who wage war from within the armored shells of humanity's most powerful land-based weapons. These are not the glamorous heroes of imperial propaganda hollows. They are not the pristine warriors depicted in recruitment posters across a million worlds. They are men and women who spend their days cramped inside hot, noisy metal coffins that smell of promethium fuel, gun oil, and human sweat. They are the souls who know that their armored shell, for all its thick ceramite plating and powerful guns, can become their tomb in an instant. A single well-placed shot, a catastrophic ammunition detonation, or a breach in the hull can transform their sanctuary into a burning pyre from which there is no escape. The life of a tank crewman in the 41st millennium is one of contradictions. They command some of the most powerful weapons in the Imperial arsenal, capable of reducing enemy fortifications to rubble and annihilating infantry by the hundreds. Yet they are also among the most vulnerable, sealed inside vehicles that attract every anti-armor weapon on the battlefield. They form bonds of brotherhood with their fellow crew members that transcend even family ties. Yet they must watch these brothers die in ways that would break lesser souls. They serve as the armored fist of the Emperor, yet they spend most of their time performing monotonous maintenance on temperamental machines that seem to resist every attempt at proper function. To understand the tank crew's existence, one must first understand the role that armored warfare plays in the Imperium's military doctrine. The Astra Militarum, that vast military machine composed of billions upon billions of soldiers drawn from across the galaxy, relies on a simple but brutally effective strategy. Where the enemy is strong, the Guard brings overwhelming force. Where the enemy has numbers, the Guard brings more. And when neither infantry nor artillery can break the foe, the Guard brings its tanks. The Leman Russ battle tank, that ubiquitous war machine named for a legendary Primarch, forms the backbone of Imperial armored forces. Based on ancient standard template construct technology dating back to humanity's golden age, the Leman Russ is a testament to both the ingenuity of mankind's past and the degradation of its present. It is a simple vehicle by the standards of the dark age of technology, lacking many of the sophisticated systems that once made human armor invincible. Yet, in the hands of a skilled crew, a Leman Russ becomes a mobile fortress capable of turning the tide of battle. But the Leman Russ is just one among many. There are the massive Baneblades, those super heavy tanks that tower over the battlefield like mobile cathedrals of destruction, requiring 10 crew members to operate their multiple weapons systems. There are the swift Hellhounds, their Promethium tanks a deadly liability that marks their crews as either brave or insane. There are the long-range Basilisks, those artillery platforms that rain death from afar, and the anti-armor destroyers with their temperamental laser weapons that can vaporize enemy tanks, but just as easily malfunction and kill their own crews. Each type of tank demands different skills, different temperaments, different kinds of courage from its crew. Yet all share certain universal truths. All are loud beyond imagination, the roar of their engines and the thunder of their guns creating a constant cacophony that permanently damages hearing. All are uncomfortable, designed for function rather than the comfort of the humans who must operate them. All are dangerous, not just from enemy fire, but from their own systems, their own ammunition, their own mechanical failures. The men and women who crew these machines come from 1,000 different worlds, each with its own traditions and methods of warfare. Some, like the Cadian shock troops, are born into military families and begin their training as children, learning the intricacies of tank operation before they learn to read. Others are drawn from the nobility of feudal worlds, where commanding a tank is considered a position of high honor. Still others are press-ganged from hive world gangs, given the choice between service in a tank crew or execution for their crimes. Regardless of their origin, all tank crews share a common experience. They share the moment when they first climb through the hatch of their assigned vehicle and realize just how small the interior truly is. They share the first time they close that hatch and feel the weight of tons of armor sealing them away from the outside world. They share the moment when the engine roars to life and they understand that from this point forward, their survival depends not just on their own skills, but on the skills of every other crew member, on the proper function of thousands of mechanical components, and on the favor of the God Emperor himself. This is their story. This is the brutal life of a tank crew in Warhammer 40,000. Recruitment and the forge of war. The path to becoming a tank crewman in the Astra Militarum varies as wildly as the Imperium itself, shaped by the culture and circumstances of each recruiting world. There is no single method, no unified training doctrine that applies across the galaxy. Instead, there are 10,000 different ways to find oneself sealed inside an armored vehicle, heading toward a war that will test every limit of human endurance. On Cadia, that fortress world that stood for 10 millennia against the terrors of the Eye of Terror, tank crew training began almost from birth. Cadian children grew up in a society so militarized that civilian life was merely a brief interlude between wars. From the moment they could walk, they were taught to strip and maintain weapons. By the time they reached adolescence, they were drilling with live ammunition. Those who showed aptitude for mechanical systems, who demonstrated the spatial awareness and quick thinking necessary for armored warfare, were identified early and tracked into specialized schools. The Cadian model produced some of the finest tank crews in the Imperium. Their training was comprehensive, covering not just the operation of the tank itself, but tactics, maintenance, emergency repairs, and how to fight on when half your crew was dead and your vehicle was barely functional. A Cadian tank commander could navigate by dead reckoning through a sandstorm, coordinate with infantry and artillery elements through garbled Vox traffic, and extract maximum performance from a damaged vehicle held together more by prayers to the Omnissiah than by proper engineering. But Cadia was unique in the intensity and quality of its training. Most worlds could not afford such investment in their military forces. On feudal worlds, tank crews were drawn from the nobility, young men and women of good breeding who saw service in an armored regiment as a path to glory and honor. Their training was often excellent in the basics of gunnery and tactics, taught by veteran officers who had survived decades of warfare. But it was often lacking in practical skills like field maintenance or how to survive when your tank was disabled deep in enemy territory. On hive worlds, where billions lived stacked in massive urban warrens, tank crews were often recruited from the planetary defense forces or even from the criminal gangs that controlled the underhives. These recruits brought street smarts and a certain vicious cunning to their service, but they often lacked formal military training. They learned their trade through brutal experience, assigned to veteran crews where they started as loaders or hull gunners and worked their way up through survival and demonstrated competence. The Death Worlds produced tank crews of a different sort entirely. On planets where every day was a struggle against hostile environments and deadly predators, those who volunteered for tank service were often seeking escape from the constant danger of their homeworld. Ironically, they often found that the interior of a tank during combat was even more dangerous than the jungles or wastelands they fled. But Deathworlders brought exceptional survival instincts and an ability to function under extreme stress that made them valuable crew members. Regardless of their origin, all potential tank crews faced certain universal trials. They had to prove they could function in the cramped, hot, loud environment of a tank's interior. They had to demonstrate they could follow orders instantly and without question, because hesitation in combat meant death. They had to show they could work as part of a team, because a tank crew was not a collection of individuals, but a single organism with multiple parts. The training process itself was deliberately harsh. designed to weed out those who could not handle the physical and psychological demands of armored warfare. Recruits spent hours sealed inside training vehicles, learning to cope with the claustrophobia, the heat, the constant noise. They practiced their roles until they could perform them in their sleep, because in combat, sleep-deprived and exhausted, that muscle memory might be all that kept them alive. For those assigned to be drivers, the training focused on handling the massive weight and bulk of an armored vehicle. A Lehman Russ weighed over 60 tons, and maneuvering such a beast required skill and experience. Drivers learned to read terrain, to know instinctively whether their vehicle could cross a particular obstacle or would bog down and become an immobile target. They learned to reverse at speed while under fire, to perform the tricky pivot turns that could bring their heaviest armor to bear on an enemy, to work the levers and pedals that controlled their metal steed. Gunners underwent intensive training in target acquisition and fire control. They learned to identify enemy vehicles at extreme range, to calculate lead and elevation for moving targets, to make snap decisions about which threat to engage first. The primary gunner, seated in the turret alongside the loader and commander, bore the heaviest burden. In combat, they might have only seconds to identify a target, aim, and fire before that target destroyed them. There was no room for error, no second chances. Loaders developed a different set of skills. Their job required brute strength and endurance, hauling heavy shells from the ammunition racks and ramming them into the breech of the main gun. In sustained combat, a loader might handle dozens of rounds, each weighing 20 kilograms or more, all while being thrown around by the tank's movement and half deafened by the gun's firing. The best loaders developed an almost supernatural ability to anticipate what type of round would be needed next, loading high explosive for infantry, armor-piercing for vehicles, all without waiting for orders. The tank commander occupied the most complex and demanding position. They were responsible not just for their own tank, but often for an entire squadron. They had to maintain awareness of the tactical situation, communicate with higher headquarters and other units, designate targets for their gunner, and make split-second decisions that could mean the difference between victory and death. Commander training emphasized leadership, tactical thinking, and the ability to process multiple streams of information simultaneously. Beyond the basic crew positions, there were specialists. Some tanks required dedicated sponson gunners to operate side-mounted weapons. Super heavy tanks like the Baneblade needed tactical officers to manage communications and coordinate the vehicle's multiple weapon systems. All tanks benefited from the ministrations of tech priests and engineers, those servants of the machine god who alone could perform the most complex repairs and appease the machine spirits that supposedly inhabited every vehicle. The bond between crew members began forming during training and deepened through shared hardship. A tank crew lived together, worked together, fought together, and often died together. They learned each other's strengths and weaknesses, developed their own communication shortcuts and inside jokes, became a family in all but blood. The commander learned to read the tension in his gunner's voice, to know when his driver was reaching the limits of exhaustion, to sense when his loader was struggling with a jammed mechanism. This bond was essential, because trust was everything. When your tank came under fire, and enemy rounds were slamming into your armor, you had to trust that your driver would get you to cover, that your gunner would eliminate the threat, that your loader would keep ammunition flowing. When your vehicle was disabled and burning, you had to trust that your crew would work together to escape, that no one would panic and block the hatches in their fear. The final stage of training was the first deployment, the moment when a crew received their assigned vehicle and prepared to take it to war. This was when the theoretical knowledge gained in training schools met the brutal reality of combat. This was when young men and women discovered what it truly meant to be a tank crewman in the Astra Militarum. For many, this discovery came too late. The average life expectancy of an Imperial Guardsman was often measured in hours after their first combat deployment. For tank crews, the statistics were slightly better, but not by much. A tank's armor could turn aside small arms fire and even some anti-tank weapons, giving its crew protection that infantry lacked. But when that protection failed, when a lucky shot penetrated the armor or an ammunition fire started, the crew's chances of survival dropped to almost nothing. Those who survived their first battles, who learned through experience the 1,000 small tricks and techniques that training could never fully teach, became veterans. They learned to read the battlefield, to know when to advance and when to reverse, when to engage and when to seek cover. They learned to tell the difference between an impact that bounced off their armor and one that penetrated. They learned to function through fear, through exhaustion, through the trauma of watching friends die. These veterans became the core around which new crews were built. When casualties created vacancies, fresh recruits from training would be slotted in to learn from those who had survived. This informal apprenticeship system ensured that hard-won knowledge passed from one generation of tankers to the next, even as the faces changed and the death toll mounted. But no amount of training, no accumulation of experience, could fully prepare a crew for the reality of war in the 41st millennium. Because the enemies of mankind were not merely other humans with similar weapons and tactics. They were Xenos horrors with weaponry that defied comprehension, demonic entities that violated the laws of physics, traitors who had turned the Imperium's own technology against its creators. Inside the iron coffin. To truly understand the life of a tank crewman, one must first understand the vehicle itself, that armored shell that serves as both weapon and home, fortress and prison. The interior of a Lehman Russ battle tank is a study in brutal functionality, every cubic centimeter devoted to weapons, ammunition, engine, or the minimal space required for human operators. Comfort is not merely an afterthought. It is actively hostile to the design philosophy. Imagine climbing through the commander's hatch on the turret top, lowering yourself into a space barely large enough for your body. The first thing that strikes you is the smell, a nauseating mixture of promethium fuel, gun oil, human sweat, and the metallic tang of hot steel. The second thing is the heat. The engine compartment, separated from the crew area by a thin bulkhead, radiates tremendous warmth even when at idle. During operation, the interior temperature can climb to levels that leave crew members drenched in sweat, fighting against heat exhaustion even as they fight against the enemy. The third thing you notice is the noise. Even with the engine off, a tank is never truly quiet. Metal creaks as it expands and contracts. Fluids gurgle through pipes. The Vox system produces a constant low hiss of static. But when the engine roars to life, when the guns begin to fire, the noise becomes a physical force that batters at your senses. The main battle cannon produces a sound so loud that even with hearing protection, even with the tank's bulk surrounding you, each shot feels like a blow to the chest. The crew compartment is divided into two main sections. The hull contains the driver's position, cramped into the front of the tank with a limited forward view through vision blocks and optical scopes. The driver sits in a reclined position, legs stretched out to reach the pedals, hands on the control levers that steer the massive vehicle. Around them is the bulk of the engine, the ammunition storage, the fuel tanks, all the mechanical systems that keep the tank mobile. The turret houses the rest of the crew. The gunner sits on one side, eye pressed to the gun sight, hands on the controls that traverse the turret and elevate the main gun. The loader occupies the other side, surrounded by ammunition racks containing the massive shells that feed the battle cannon. Above and behind them sits the commander, positioned to look through the cupola vision blocks or to expose themselves through the hatch for direct observation. In this tiny space, measured in mere cubic meters, 3 or 4 people must coexist for hours or even days at a time. There is no privacy, no personal space. Every movement must be carefully coordinated to avoid interfering with someone else's tasks. The loader must duck when the breech recoils. The commander must ensure they are not blocking the gunner's sight picture. Everyone must remain aware of the turret's orientation to avoid having their feet crushed as it traverses. The sensory experience of combat in a tank is unlike anything else in warfare. The crew cannot see the battlefield directly. They view it through narrow vision blocks, gun sights, and optical periscopes that provide only limited fields of view. This creates a disorienting tunnel vision where threats can appear suddenly from blind spots, where situational awareness must be maintained through fragments of visual information and vox reports from other units. Sound becomes crucial for survival. A veteran crew learns to distinguish different types of impacts on their armor. A glancing blow that skitters off the front glacis sounds different from a penetrating hit that punches through. The whine of an incoming rocket sounds different from the crack of a laser weapon. The commander must filter through the roar of their own engine and guns to hear reports from other tanks, from infantry, from headquarters, all while issuing orders to their own crew. The physical demands are relentless. The loader must maintain a brutal pace, hoisting 20-kilogram shells repeatedly during sustained combat. Historical accounts speak of loaders who handled so many rounds that their hands bled, their muscles cramped, but who continued because stopping meant death for the entire crew. The driver must maintain focus even as the tank crashes over rough terrain, even as impacts shake the entire vehicle, even as they fight against the natural human instinct to flee from danger. The gunner's role requires a different kind of endurance. They must remain focused on their sight picture, tracking targets, making the minute adjustments necessary for accurate fire, all while being violently thrown around by the tank's movement. Many gunners develop chronic neck and back problems from the constant strain of maintaining their position. Some lose vision in one eye from the constant pressure of keeping it against the sight. The commander bears perhaps the heaviest mental burden. They must process information from multiple sources simultaneously. The tactical display showing friendly and enemy positions, vox reports from headquarters and other units, visual observation of the battlefield, and reports from their own crew about ammunition status, mechanical issues, damage. They must make rapid decisions about targets, movement, when to engage, and when to withdraw, all while keeping their crew alive and their tank functional. Living conditions inside a tank during extended operations are primitive at best. Crews eat while seated at their stations, consuming field rations that are barely palatable even when fresh and become actively unpleasant after days in the heat. They relieve themselves into containers or, if lucky, can briefly exit the tank during lulls in combat. They sleep in shifts, dozing at their stations or sprawled in the cramped spaces between equipment. Hygiene becomes impossible. Days or weeks can pass without an opportunity for proper bathing. Crews develop distinctive odors that mark them as tankers, a smell of sweat and fuel and oil that no amount of washing can fully remove. Skin problems are endemic, from heat rash to fungal infections that thrive in the damp, warm environment. Wounds and injuries that would heal easily in clean conditions become infected, sometimes seriously enough to remove a crew member from duty. The psychological impact of this confinement should not be underestimated. Humans are not meant to spend extended periods in such restricted spaces, cut off from natural light and fresh air. Claustrophobia is a common problem among new crew members, and some never overcome it, washing out of armored service or suffering psychological breaks. Even those who adapt find the isolation wearing, a constant low-level stress that accumulates over time. This stress is compounded by the awareness of vulnerability. The armor that protects you also traps you. The ammunition that gives you offensive power can kill you if it detonates. The fuel that lets you maneuver is a fire hazard waiting for a spark. Every crew member knows that if their tank is penetrated, if fire breaks out, they have only seconds to escape before the interior becomes an inferno. They know that hatches can jam, that wounded crew members might block the exits, that in the chaos of combat, escape is never guaranteed. The crew becomes intimately familiar with every aspect of their vehicle, learning its quirks and idiosyncrasies. They learn that the turret traverse motor makes a particular whining sound just before it fails. They learn that the fuel gauge reads incorrectly and must be mentally adjusted. They learn where the armor is weakest, where impacts are most likely to penetrate. They give their tank a name, paint it with kill markings and unit insignia. treat it almost as a living thing. This relationship between crew and machine is encouraged by the Adeptus Mechanicus, whose tech priests teach that tanks possess machine spirits that must be properly respected and appeased. Whether these spirits truly exist, or whether the concept is merely a useful fiction that encourages proper maintenance, is debatable. What is not debatable is that crews who treat their vehicles with care, who perform religious maintenance rituals, who speak to their tanks and pray over their systems, tend to have better luck than those who do not. The interior of larger vehicles like the Baneblade presents different challenges. With more space comes more complexity. The Baneblade's interior is divided across multiple decks, with cramped corridors connecting the various crew stations. Navigation through the interior requires careful movement to avoid hitting one's head on low overhangs or getting caught in the machinery. The crew of 10 must coordinate their actions across greater distances, relying on the internal Vox system to communicate. But even in a super-heavy tank, space is at a premium. The Baneblade's apparent size from the exterior is deceptive. Most of that volume is occupied by armor, weapons, ammunition storage, fuel tanks, and the massive power plant that drives the vehicle. The actual crew compartments are no more comfortable than those in a Lehman Russ, just more numerous. The crew still works in heat and noise and discomfort, still faces the same fundamental reality of armored warfare. You are sealed inside a metal box that is simultaneously your greatest protection and your most likely coffin. Daily life between the battles. War in the Imperium is not continuous combat. Even in the most brutal campaigns, there are lulls, periods when the fighting pauses for regrouping, resupply, or simply because both sides are too exhausted to continue. During these interludes, the tank crew's life shifts from the immediate terror of combat to a different kind of hardship, one defined by monotonous routine, relentless maintenance, and the constant preparation for the next battle. The first priority after any engagement is maintenance. The Lehman Russ, for all its legendary reliability, is still a complex machine with thousands of moving parts, all operating under extreme stress. The tracks must be inspected for damage and wear, damaged links replaced before they fail. The engine requires constant attention, with fluids checked and topped off, filters cleaned or replaced, fuel lines inspected for leaks. The weapon systems demand their own rituals, barrels cleaned of carbon buildup, recoil mechanisms serviced, ammunition racks restocked and properly secured. This maintenance is not merely mechanical work, it is a religious duty. The Adeptus Mechanicus teaches that the machine god inhabits all mechanisms, and that proper maintenance is a form of worship. Tech priests and enginseers lead the crew through elaborate rituals, chanting prayers in binary cant as they anoint gears with blessed unguents and inscribe prayer seals on vulnerable components. The tank crew may not fully understand the theological implications, but they learn quickly that tanks whose crews are diligent in these observances tend to function better than those whose crews are not. The crew performs much of this maintenance themselves, particularly the routine tasks that keep the vehicle operational day to day. The driver is responsible for the running gear, checking tracks and road wheels, and suspension components. The gunner maintains the weapons systems, ensuring that targeting equipment remains calibrated and that the main gun is properly zeroed. The loader manages ammunition, checking each shell for damage or deterioration, ensuring that the ready racks are properly stocked. But some maintenance requires specialist knowledge and tools. When the plasma coils in an executioner's main weapon begin to degrade, when a demolisher's siege cannon develops a crack in the barrel, when any of 1,000 complex systems fails, the crew must summon assistance from the regimental tech priests. These servants of Mars arrive with their retinue of servitors, those lobotomized cyborg slaves who perform the heavy labor while the tech priest intones prayers and performs the sacred rites of repair. The relationship between tank crews and tech priests is complex. The crews depend on the Mechanicus for repairs they cannot perform themselves, for replacement parts, for the specialized knowledge needed to keep ancient technology functioning. But there is also resentment. Tech priests often seem more concerned with the well-being of the machines than of the humans who operate them. They speak in technical jargon and religious cant that outsiders struggle to understand. They prioritize repairs based on criteria that do not always align with tactical necessity. Smart tank commanders learn to cultivate good relationships with their regiment's tech priests. They ensure their crews are respectful during maintenance rituals. They offer gifts when replacement parts are needed. They learn at least the basics of the Mechanicus litanies and prayers. In return, their tanks receive priority for repairs, access to better quality replacement parts, and the benefit of the tech priest's accumulated wisdom about coaxing performance from recalcitrant machines. Between maintenance duties, crews must attend to the other necessities of military life. There are inspections to prepare for, reports to file, training exercises to complete. Officers hold briefings about upcoming operations, reviewing maps and intelligence reports, assigning objectives and coordinating with other units. Commissars conduct ideological instruction, reinforcing the imperial creed and watching for any signs of heresy or cowardice. The crew must also see to their personal needs, tasks made difficult by the austere conditions of a military camp. Bathing facilities, when they exist at all, are crude and communal. Food comes from mobile kitchens that serve the same bland rations day after day, occasionally supplemented by local food, if the planet they are fighting on is capable of producing anything edible. Medical care is available for serious injuries and illnesses, but minor complaints are generally ignored unless they threaten combat effectiveness. Sleep is precious and never adequate. Even when not on duty, tank crews often struggle to sleep, their rest disturbed by nightmares of combat, by the sounds of artillery in the distance, by the knowledge that the next deployment could come at any moment. They sleep in whatever shelter is available, inside their tanks, in tents if the regiment has them, in requisitioned buildings if they are fighting in urban terrain, or simply on the ground with a bedroll if nothing better is available. The bonds between crew members deepen during these periods. They share stories about their homeworlds, about their families, about their hopes for survival, and what they will do if they ever receive leave. They develop private jokes and rituals, little traditions that mark their crew as distinct from others. Some crews become as close as family, trusting each other with secrets they would never share with outsiders. Others remain professional but distant, finding that emotional detachment is easier to maintain when you know your comrades might be dead tomorrow. Religion plays a significant role in daily life. The Imperial Creed teaches that service to the Emperor is humanity's highest calling, that death in his service guarantees a place at his side. Most guardsmen believe this with varying degrees of conviction. Tank crews attend religious services when available, pray before combat, wear aquilers and other religious symbols. Some develop elaborate personal rituals, believing that certain actions bring good luck or divine protection. The superstitions common among soldiers are amplified in tank crews. They believe that certain tanks are lucky or cursed based on their history. They perform rituals before entering combat, touching specific parts of their vehicle in a particular order, reciting prayers or oaths. They collect talismans and lucky charms, carrying them into battle as psychological armor against the horrors they face. Entertainment and distraction are hard to come by. Some crews maintain decks of cards or dice for gambling, playing for ration chits or promises of future favors. Others write letters home, knowing that those letters will probably never be delivered, but finding comfort in the act of writing. Some sketch or paint, documenting their experiences in art. Many simply talk, endless conversations that help pass the time and distract from thoughts of mortality. Alcohol, when available, is consumed enthusiastically. The Departamento Munitorum officially frowns on drunkenness, but unofficially recognizes that soldiers under extreme stress need some form of release. Crews trade for alcohol, brew their own from whatever ingredients they can scavenge, or simply steal it when opportunity arises. Drinking becomes a social ritual, a way to bond with fellow crew members, to temporarily forget the horrors of war. The arrival of new crew members, replacing those lost to combat or other causes, disrupts the established dynamic. The veterans must integrate these newcomers, teach them the unwritten rules of their specific tank, help them adapt to the crew's culture. Some veterans are patient and helpful, remembering their own early days. Others are harsh and dismissive, testing the newcomers to see if they have the mettle to survive. All are aware that time and effort invested in training a new crew member might be wasted if that person dies in their first battle. Mail call, when it comes, is an event of tremendous importance. Letters from home, even if months or years out of date by the time they arrive, provide a connection to the world beyond the war. They remind crew members of what they are fighting for, of the families and communities depending on their service. But mail call can also bring tragic news. A wife remarried after receiving word of her husband's death, a homeworld lost to Xenos invasion, family members killed in unrelated conflicts. Some crew members stop requesting mail, finding that ignorance is easier than bearing bad news they can do nothing about. During longer periods of inactivity, the crew might receive training on new equipment or tactics. They might participate in war games, mock battles, where different units test themselves against each other. These exercises serve multiple purposes. They keep skills sharp, they allow commanders to evaluate unit performance, and they provide a structured activity that prevents boredom and maintains discipline. Throughout all of this, the crew remains on alert. Even behind the lines, even in supposedly secure areas, danger is never far away. Enemy infiltrators can strike with sabotage or assassination. Artillery barrages can land without warning. Air raids can turn a peaceful camp into an inferno. The crew learns to sleep lightly, to always know where their weapons are, to be ready to mount up and move at a moment's notice. This constant state of readiness takes its toll. The human body and mind are not designed for sustained stress, for the constant tension between boredom and terror. Crew members develop stress-related illnesses, ulcers and heart problems, and chronic fatigue. Some turn to stimulants to stay alert, to narcotics to sleep, beginning spirals of addiction that the military medical system is ill-equipped to address. Yet for all the hardship, for all the discomfort and danger and stress, many tank crews take pride in their service. They are not mere infantry, not faceless masses thrown at the enemy in human wave attacks. They are specialists, operators of complex and powerful machines. They have skills that took years to develop, knowledge that makes them valuable. They belong to an elite within the Guard, even if that elite is still ultimately expendable in the grinding calculus of Imperial warfare. This pride manifests in the care they take with their vehicles, in the rivalry between different crews and squadrons, in the traditions and honors that mark veteran units. A crew that has survived multiple campaigns, that has faced down death repeatedly and emerged victorious, carries themselves differently than raw recruits. They have earned the right to their pride through blood and sacrifice, through friends lost and horrors witnessed, through the simple act of survival in a galaxy that devours the weak without mercy. Into the maelstrom of battle. The preparation for combat begins hours before the first shot is fired. The crew wakes, whether to the shrill call of reveille or the urgent summons of an alert klaxon, and immediately begins the pre-battle rituals that have been drilled into them through countless repetitions. These rituals serve both practical and psychological purposes, transforming civilians in uniform into warriors ready to face death. First comes the checking of equipment. Every crew member inspects their personal gear: flak armor, helmet, sidearm, survival kit. The driver checks the vehicle's status, confirming fuel levels, fluid pressures, track tension. The gunner performs a final calibration of the targeting systems, ensuring that the tank's guns will shoot where they are aimed. The loader counts ammunition, verifying that the racks are fully stocked with the appropriate mix of rounds for the expected engagement. The commander briefs the crew on the mission, using whatever intelligence is available. They review maps showing the terrain, identify likely enemy positions, discuss the plan of maneuver. In an ideal world, this briefing would be comprehensive and accurate. In reality, intelligence is often outdated or incomplete, maps are unreliable, and the plan rarely survives contact with the enemy. But the briefing serves its purpose, giving the crew a shared understanding of objectives and a common framework for making decisions when communication breaks down. Prayers and rituals follow. The tech priest leads the crew in beseeching the machine spirit of their vehicle, anointing the tank with sacred oils, and affixing purity seals to vulnerable points. The crew recites the litany of protection, the prayer for accurate fire, the catechism of the tank. These observances may seem superstitious to outsiders, but they serve a vital function. They focus the mind, transform fear into determination, create the mental state necessary for combat. Personal rituals vary widely. Some crew members touch specific parts of their tank in a particular sequence, believing this brings good luck. Others carry talismans or holy relics, kissing them before entering the vehicle. Many write final letters to be delivered if they do not survive. This may seem morbid, but it provides closure, a way to say goodbye to loved ones without the weight of unsaid words. The moment of mounting up is when the reality of impending combat becomes undeniable. The crew climbs through the hatches, each taking their station. The driver settles into position, hands on the control levers. The loader makes one final check of the ammunition racks. The gunner puts eye to sight. The commander takes position in the cupola, from which they can observe the battlefield and command their crew. The engine rumbles to life, that deep thrumming roar that signifies tons of armored steel preparing for war. The Voxnet crackles with traffic as units report readiness. The formation begins to move, tanks advancing in coordination with infantry and other supporting elements. The battle has not yet been joined, but the machinery of war has been set in motion. The advance toward contact is a time of mounting tension. The crew scans for threats, knowing that the enemy could be anywhere. The commander rotates slowly in the cupola, studying the terrain through magnoculars, listening to Vox reports from reconnaissance elements. The gunner keeps the main gun trained on likely enemy positions, ready to engage instantly. The driver maintains position in the formation, using the tank ahead as a guide when dust obscures visibility. Terrain becomes crucial. The commander must constantly evaluate the ground, seeking routes that provide cover or good firing positions, while avoiding areas where the tank could become stuck or exposed. They watch for signs of mines or improvised explosives, for positions where enemy anti-tank teams might be hiding, for kill zones where the enemy has prepared overlapping fields of fire. The first indication of enemy contact often comes from units forward in the formation. A crackle of small arms fire, an explosion, a frantic Vox report of enemy sighted. The formation reacts, tanks shifting into combat positions, infantry deploying to screen the armor. The gunner searches frantically for targets, knowing that the first side to land an effective hit often wins the engagement. Then the battle is joined in earnest, and all the training, all the preparation is put to the test. The gunner spots an enemy tank, calls out range and bearing. The commander confirms the target and gives the fire order. The loader slams a round into the breech and shouts ready. The gunner centers the crosshairs and fires. The battle cannon speaks with a sound that defies description, a thunderous roar that shakes the entire vehicle. Even through hearing protection, the noise is overwhelming, a physical shock that rattles teeth and leaves ears ringing. The tank rocks backward from the recoil, suspension compressing and then rebounding. Acrid smoke from the gun's bore evacuator fills the turret, adding to the already stifling atmosphere. There is no time to admire your handiwork, no moment to celebrate if the shot hits home. The loader is already feeding the next round. The gunner is searching for additional targets. The commander is directing the driver to a new position while coordinating with other tanks in the squadron. Combat in a tank is a continuous flow of action, each task flowing into the next, each crew member's actions dependent on those of their comrades. Enemy fire begins to arrive. The first you know of it, might be the crack of a round passing close by, or the impact as a shot slams into your armor. The tank rings like a bell when struck, a deep metallic gonging that transmits through the hull into the crew's bones. A glancing hit produces a shower of sparks as the round skitters off the sloped armor. A penetrating hit announces itself differently, with a sharp crack followed by horrifying secondary effects. The crew must distinguish between hits that are dangerous and those that are merely frightening. Most incoming fire, even from anti-tank weapons, will not penetrate a Leman Russ's front armor if the tank is properly angled. But rounds that strike weak points, the thinner side and rear armor, the joints and vision slits, can punch through with catastrophic results. A penetrating hit sends a jet of superheated metal into the crew compartment, killing or maiming anyone in its path, and often igniting ammunition or fuel. The commander must make constant tactical decisions: when to advance and when to withdraw, which targets to engage first, whether to fight from a stationary position for better accuracy or to keep moving to avoid becoming a target. These decisions must be made instantly, without the luxury of careful consideration, based on fragmentary information and the commander's experience and intuition. Communication becomes both vital and difficult. The Vox system allows coordination with other units, but the channels are often congested with traffic. Multiple people trying to transmit at once creates garbled interference. Enemy jamming can make communication impossible. Even when the system functions properly, the roar of the tank's engine and guns makes it hard to hear. The crew develops hand signals and other non-verbal communication methods to supplement the Vox. The physical demands of combat are immense. The loader works at a frantic pace, hoisting shell after shell, often while being thrown around by the tank's movement. Historical accounts from similar combat describe loaders who handled so many rounds that their hands bled, that their arms cramped into uselessness, but who continued because stopping meant death. The driver must maintain control while being unable to see most of the battlefield, relying entirely on the commander's directions, while simultaneously trying to avoid obstacles and enemy fire. Ammunition expenditure is a constant concern. A Leman Russ carries perhaps 40 rounds for its main gun, more or less depending on the variant, and how much ammunition is stowed in the sponsons. In intense combat, this can be expended in minutes. The commander must balance the need to engage targets with the need to conserve ammunition for later in the battle. Running out of main gun rounds leaves the tank able to fight only with secondary weapons, effectively reducing it to the role of a very expensive machine gun platform. The confusion of combat cannot be overstated. The crew's view of the battlefield is limited to what they can see through vision blocks and gun sights, small windows onto a wider chaos. Smoke from fires and deliberate screening obscures visibility. Dust kicked up by movement and explosions creates choking clouds that reduce vision to meters. The Vox brings fragmentary reports, often contradictory from other units. The commander must construct a mental picture of the battle from these fragments, making decisions based on incomplete and sometimes inaccurate information. Enemy forces vary wildly in their capabilities and tactics. Fighting orcs means dealing with crude but numerous vehicles that charge headlong into combat. Their crews more interested in close-range brawling than careful maneuver. The greenskins are dangerous not because of sophisticated tactics, but because of their sheer numbers and reckless aggression. A horde of orc vehicles will accept horrific casualties to close with their enemies, and once they reach close quarters, their brutal hand-to-hand weapons can tear through armor. Chaos forces present different challenges. Traitor Guard units often use Imperial equipment and tactics, making them predictable in some ways, but also giving them intimate knowledge of how Loyalist forces operate. Chaos Marines in their corrupted vehicles are fewer in number, but far more dangerous individually, each one a centuries-old veteran in power armor that can shrug off weapons that would destroy normal tanks. And the demonic entities that sometimes accompany Chaos forces defy conventional understanding, their weapons operating on principles that mock physics. Necron technology is perhaps the most terrifying opponent for an armored crew. Their Gauss weapons strip matter away at the molecular level, eating through even the thickest armor with terrifying efficiency. Their vehicles phase in and out of reality, appearing from nowhere to deliver devastating attacks. Their infantry can rise again after being destroyed, metal warriors that simply reassemble themselves and continue fighting. Conventional tank tactics often prove inadequate against foes who do not behave according to normal rules. Eldar present frustrating challenges. Their vehicles are fast and maneuverable, dancing around the slower Imperial tanks and striking at weak points before disengaging. Their weapons, though not as devastating as some other races, are accurate and wielded with consummate skill. Fighting Eldar is an exercise in frustration, trying to bring your guns to bear on targets that refuse to stay still long enough to aim at. Throughout the battle, the crew must maintain cohesion and discipline. Fear is a constant companion, the knowledge that the next hit could be the one that kills them, that their armor might fail at any moment, that they could burn alive trapped in their vehicle. Training and leadership help manage this fear, channeling it into focused aggression and careful execution of doctrine. But the fear never truly goes away. The end of an engagement brings no immediate relief. The crew must remain alert for counterattacks, must help recover damaged vehicles and wounded personnel, must prepare to resume combat at a moment's notice. Only when the tactical situation stabilizes, when security is established and resupply begins, can the crew begin to process what they have experienced. Some deal with combat stress through dark humor or aggressive posturing. Others become withdrawn and quiet. All carry the weight of what they have witnessed, adding another layer to the psychological burden of war. When death comes calling, the penetrating hit is every crew member's nightmare. In the space of a heartbeat, the armored shell that has protected them transforms into a death trap. The scenario plays out in variations, but the fundamental horror remains constant. You are sealed inside tons of steel that is rapidly becoming an inferno, and your survival depends on getting out before the vehicle explodes or before the oxygen is consumed by flames. A penetrating round announces itself with a distinctive crack, different from the ring of deflected shots. The projectile punches through the armor, creating a shower of molten metal called spalling that sprays into the crew compartment at supersonic speeds. This spalling alone can kill or maim, tiny droplets of liquefied armor that burn through flesh and ignite anything flammable they touch. The primary round continues its path of destruction, potentially striking crew members directly, damaging vital systems, or igniting ammunition or fuel. The immediate aftermath of a penetration is chaos. Lights flicker or die as electrical systems short out. The Vox system may fail, cutting off communication with other units and between crew members. Smoke fills the compartment, choking and blinding. If fuel or ammunition has been hit, fire erupts with terrifying speed, consuming oxygen and filling the crew area with toxic fumes. The crew's survival depends on their training and on luck. If the penetrating hit struck the ammunition storage, there may be no time at all. Modern tank ammunition, when detonated, produces an explosion powerful enough to blow the turret completely off the hull, to tear the vehicle apart from the inside. There are no survivors from such catastrophic failures. The crew dies instantly, vaporized by the blast, their bodies often never recovered for burial. If the crew survives the initial penetration, they face the challenge of escape. This is where the cruel geometry of tank design becomes apparent. There are only a limited number of hatches, and these are often small, barely large enough for a person to squeeze through. The commander's cupola provides one exit. The loader's hatch, if present, provides another. The driver has an emergency hatch in the hull. That is typically all. In a crisis, these hatches become bottlenecks. 3 or 4 people trying to exit simultaneously create jams. Wounded crew members may block the way, unable to move themselves and too heavy for their comrades to lift. Equipment can catch on the hatch frames. Darkness and smoke make it hard to find the hatches. Panic can cause crew members to fight each other in their desperation to escape. Training emphasizes emergency egress procedures, practicing escapes until the movements become automatic. The crew drills on exiting from a burning vehicle, on extracting wounded comrades, on coordinating their movements to avoid blocking each other. But training can only go so far. In the reality of combat, with real fire and real wounds and real terror, even well-trained crews can make fatal mistakes. The loader is often in the most dangerous position. Surrounded by ammunition, seated near the turret's ammunition doors, they are most likely to be killed or wounded by an ammunition fire. If they survive but are injured, they may be unable to reach a hatch. Their only hope then is that their comrades can drag them to safety before the vehicle explodes or before they succumb to smoke inhalation. The driver faces different challenges. Positioned in the hull, separated from the rest of the crew, they may not immediately know that the tank has been hit or is burning. Their vision is limited to the view through their forward periscopes. They might not see the smoke filling the turret until it reaches their position. By then, it may be too late. Many drivers have died at their stations, overcome by fumes before they realized they needed to escape. Even if the crew successfully exits the vehicle, their ordeal is not over. They emerge into a battlefield where they are now exposed and vulnerable. Enemy fire that bounced harmlessly off their armor will cut them down. They may be disoriented, half blind from smoke, coughing from inhaled fumes, possibly wounded. They must find cover, link up with friendly forces, all while their tank burns behind them. The psychological trauma of losing a tank is profound. The crew's identity is tied to their vehicle. They have worked in it, slept in it, fought in it. They have given it a name, decorated it with kill markings and unit insignia, developed a relationship with it that borders on the emotional. Watching it burn, knowing that their home and fortress is being destroyed, is a loss comparable to watching one's house burn down. Worse is the loss of crew members who did not make it out. Tankers form bonds closer than family, trusting each other with their lives day after day. To lose a crew member, to know they burned or suffocated inside the vehicle, to be unable to save them, creates a guilt and grief that many never overcome. Survivors may blame themselves, wondering if they could have done something different, if they should have tried harder to pull their comrades free. Not all tank deaths are dramatic. Mechanical failures can kill just as surely as enemy action. An engine fire, a fuel leak that ignites, a carbon monoxide buildup from poor ventilation. These mundane hazards claim lives regularly. The crew goes to sleep one night and does not wake up, killed by invisible fumes. Or a thrown track causes the tank to slide into a ravine, crushing the crew inside. Or a bridge collapses under the vehicle's weight, drowning the crew in a river or burying them in mud. Disease and environmental hazards also take their toll. Crews operating in toxic atmospheres or radioactive zones face slow death from exposure. Proper environmental sealing can protect them, but only if the seals remain intact. A single hole in the hull, a damaged hatch seal, can let in lethal contamination. The crew may not realize they are being poisoned until symptoms appear, and by then the damage is often irreversible. The recovery of destroyed tanks and their crews is a grim but necessary task. Salvage teams move through battlefields after the fighting subsides, identifying disabled vehicles. Those that can be repaired are towed back to workshops. Those too badly damaged are stripped of useful parts and then destroyed to prevent the enemy from salvaging them. The crews are recovered when possible, given whatever rites are appropriate to their faith, and buried or cremated. Often, recovery is impossible. Tanks destroyed in enemy-held territory remain where they fell, becoming monuments to their crew's sacrifice. Battlefields across the galaxy are littered with the rusting hulks of Imperial armor, each one containing the remains of its crew. Some eventually weather away, metals slowly oxidizing and fragmenting over decades or centuries. Others are buried by shifting soil or covered by vegetation. hidden graves that may never be found. The Departamento Munitorum tracks casualties with bureaucratic efficiency, reducing deaths to statistics in reports. 3 tanks destroyed, 15 crew members killed, 47 wounded. These numbers are analyzed, trends identified, lessons supposedly learned. But behind each statistic is a person, someone with hopes and fears and loved ones, someone who climbed into a tank one last time and never climbed out. The effect on survivors cannot be quantified in reports. Crews who lose members must integrate replacements, must overcome the psychological burden of fighting in a tank that has already killed its previous occupants. They wonder if the vehicle is cursed, if the machine's spirit is angry, if they will be the next to die. Some crews refuse to crew a tank with a bad history, considering it doomed. Others take it as a challenge, determined to succeed where others failed. For the families and loved ones, the loss is often abstract. They receive a notification that their son or daughter, husband or wife, has died in the Emperor's service. They are told it was an honorable death, that the Emperor welcomes the faithful into his presence. They receive a martyrdom certificate, signed by an officer who may never have known the deceased. Then they must continue with their lives, carrying the burden of loss, often never knowing exactly how or where their loved one died. This is the reality that every tank crew lives with. Every time they mount up, every time they close the hatches and advance toward the enemy, they know they might not return. They see the burned out wrecks of other tanks, smell the distinctive odor of burned human flesh that clings to destroyed vehicles, and know that they could end up the same way. Yet they continue, because duty demands it, because their comrades depend on them, because in the grim darkness of the far future, someone must stand between humanity and extinction. The Super Heavy Burden. The Baneblade Super Heavy tank represents the pinnacle of Imperial armored warfare, a mobile fortress that weighs over 300 tons and carries enough firepower to level a city block. To crew such a vehicle is considered a tremendous honor, proof that the Adeptus Mechanicus has deemed you worthy to operate one of the Imperium's most precious war machines. But with this honor comes burdens that lighter tank crews never face, responsibilities and dangers unique to the Super Heavy tank. A Baneblade requires a crew of 10, each with specialized roles. The commander occupies a position in the turret, but unlike the commander of a Leman Russ, who can directly observe the battlefield and personally command the gun, the Baneblade commander must coordinate the entire crew. They have a tactical officer to assist with communications and data management. They have a primary gunner for the main turret weapon and secondary gunners for the sponson weapons. They have multiple loaders, a driver, and often an attached tech priest to monitor the vehicle's complex systems. This larger crew introduces complexities absent in smaller tanks. Coordination becomes crucial. The commander cannot directly supervise every crew station. They must delegate authority and trust that their subordinates will execute their duties properly. The tactical officer serves as the commander's right hand, managing the flow of information, monitoring Vox communications, and helping to maintain the commander's situational awareness. The interior of a Baneblade, while larger than a Leman Russ, is still cramped when one considers the crew size and the equipment that must be housed. The layout spans multiple decks, connected by narrow companionways. The driver sits in the forward hull, isolated from the rest of the crew. The magazine occupies the central section, heavily armored to protect the enormous quantity of ammunition the vehicle carries. The turret holds the commander, tactical officer, main gunner, and primary loader. The sponson gunners occupy their own small stations along the sides of the hull. Navigation through the Baneblade's interior requires care. The ceiling is low in many sections, and pipes and cables run along the bulkheads, creating obstacles. During combat, when the vehicle is moving and being struck by enemy fire, moving through the interior becomes hazardous. Crew members can be thrown against bulkheads, can hit their heads on low overhangs, can become disoriented in the maze-like layout. The weapon systems of a Baneblade are fearsome but demanding. The main turret mounts a massive baneblade cannon, a weapon that fires rocket-assisted shells capable of destroying enemy armor at ranges measured in kilometers. The secondary weapons include a demolisher cannon in the hull, twin heavy bolters, las cannons, and often additional sponson-mounted weapons. Coordinating all these weapons requires constant communication between the commander and the various gunners. Ammunition management becomes a complex task. Different weapons require different ammunition types, and each must be kept properly stocked. The loaders must know which ammunition goes to which weapon, must ensure that the racks are organized for efficient access, must count remaining rounds to warn the commander when supplies run low. A mistake in ammunition handling could leave a weapon unable to fire at a critical moment, or worse, could cause a catastrophic explosion. The tactical employment of a baneblade differs from that of a standard battle tank. The vehicle is too valuable to risk in routine engagements, too slow to exploit breakthroughs, too large to hide. Instead, baneblades serve as mobile command posts, as anchors for defensive positions, as the ultimate answer to enemy super-heavy units or fortifications that standard tanks cannot crack. The baneblade commander must think strategically, understanding how their vehicle fits into the larger battle plan. The prestige of crewing a baneblade comes with scrutiny. The Adeptus Mechanicus takes a keen interest in these rare vehicles, maintaining detailed records of each one's location and status. The crew is selected with care, often chosen by the tech priests themselves, using prognostic algorithms and evaluations of past performance. To be selected for a baneblade crew is to have your abilities validated at the highest level, but it also means you are now responsible for a war machine that represents an enormous investment of resources and irreplaceable technology. This responsibility weighs heavily. If a baneblade is lost, the crew's performance will be scrutinized mercilessly. Questions will be asked about whether the vehicle could have been saved, whether the crew fought hard enough, whether they should have withdrawn rather than risk destruction. The Mechanicus may demand an inquiry, seeking to understand how such a precious asset was lost. Even if the crew is exonerated, the shame of losing their vehicle may haunt them. The maintenance requirements of a baneblade are extensive. The crew performs routine tasks, but the vehicle also requires regular servicing by teams of tech priests. The power plant alone, a massive multi-fuel engine capable of running on virtually any combustible material, demands hours of ritual maintenance. The engine must be completely shut down for service every 6 months, a process that can take days. Between these major overhauls, the crew performs daily checks and minor maintenance, guided by the tech priest's litanies. Operating a baneblade in combat is simultaneously exhilarating and terrifying. The vehicle can absorb punishment that would destroy lighter tanks, its thick armor turning aside all but the most powerful weapons. But the baneblade is also a massive target that attracts every anti-tank weapon in range. Enemy commanders know that destroying a baneblade can shift the momentum of an entire battle, and they concentrate their firepower accordingly. The crew experiences combat differently than their counterparts in Lehman Russes. They feel more secure behind the baneblade's thick armor, but they also know they are priority targets. They have more firepower at their command, but coordinating multiple weapons systems under fire requires intense concentration. They have more crew members to rely on, but also more people whose deaths they might witness. Communication within the crew becomes crucial. The internal Vox system allows the dispersed crew to coordinate, but it can also become overloaded during intense combat. Multiple people trying to report at once creates confusion. The commander must establish protocols, designating who speaks when, ensuring that critical information reaches them despite the chaos. The isolation of individual crew stations creates challenges. The sponson gunners, sealed in their small compartments along the vehicle's flanks, have limited situational awareness. They can see only what their weapons can target, have no view of the larger battle. They rely entirely on the commander to designate targets and warn them of threats. If the internal Vox fails, they become isolated, unable to coordinate with the rest of the crew. The driver's position is similarly isolated. Sealed in the forward hull, they pilot the massive vehicle through terrain that can challenge even such a powerful machine. They cannot see the battlefield as the commander does, cannot always understand why they are being ordered to maneuver in particular ways. They must trust in their commander's judgment, following directions even when those directions seem to lead into danger. Losing a Baneblade is a catastrophe that echoes beyond the immediate battlefield. The Adeptus Mechanicus will mobilize significant resources to recover even a destroyed hull, recognizing that the vehicle's STC technology is too precious to abandon. Entire operations have been mounted to recover Baneblades from enemy-held territory, with thousands of soldiers committed to securing a single damaged vehicle. For the crew, surviving the loss of their Baneblade brings mixed feelings. They are relieved to be alive, but they face uncertainty about their future. Will they be assigned to another Baneblade if one is available? Will they be transferred to standard tanks? A perceived demotion after the prestige of super heavy service? Will they be investigated for the vehicle's loss, potentially facing punishment if deemed at fault? The bonds formed between Baneblade crew members are especially strong, forged not just through shared combat, but through the unique experience of operating such a complex machine. They form a small community, more like the crew of a naval vessel than a typical tank crew. They develop their own traditions and culture, distinct even from other Baneblade crews. They take pride in their vehicle, in their unit, in their service. This pride is justified. Baneblade crews are among the best trained, most experienced armored warriors in the Imperium. They have proven themselves worthy of operating war machines that can change the course of battles. They carry the weight of that responsibility, knowing that their actions ripple beyond their immediate situation, that the survival of their vehicle may be crucial to the success of entire campaigns. Yet they remain, fundamentally, human. They experience the same fears, the same exhaustion, the same psychological stresses as any other tank crew. They live in the same harsh conditions, eat the same bland rations, endure the same separations from loved ones. The glory of crewing a Baneblade does not exempt them from the brutal realities of war in the 41st millennium. Recovery and repair beneath the guns. The battlefield is littered with the carcasses of disabled armored vehicles, each one representing not just lost material, but potentially salvageable equipment that the Imperium can ill afford to waste. This is where the recovery crews come in, the brave or foolish souls who venture onto active battlefields to retrieve damaged tanks and tow them back to friendly lines. Their work is unglamorous, dangerous, and absolutely essential to maintaining the Astra Militarum's fighting strength. The Atlas recovery vehicle serves as the primary tool for battlefield recovery. Based on the Lehman Russ chassis, but with the turret removed and replaced with a powerful crane and winch system, the Atlas can lift and tow vehicles weighing up to 60 tons. For heavier vehicles like the Baneblade, multiple Atlases working in concert are required, their combined pulling power sufficient to move even super heavy hulks. The crew of an Atlas faces unique dangers. Unlike combat tanks, their vehicle mounts only minimal weapons, typically just a hull-mounted heavy bolter. They rely on other units for protection, on smokescreens and speed to avoid becoming targets themselves. Yet their mission requires them to venture into exposed positions, often within range of enemy weapons, to hook up disabled vehicles and tow them away. The process of recovering a tank begins with reconnaissance. Recovery crews must locate disabled vehicles, often using Vox reports from retreating units or aerial observation. They must assess whether each vehicle is worth recovering or is too badly damaged. A tank with a thrown track or damaged engine might be repaired and returned to service within hours. A tank with catastrophic armor damage or a destroyed turret might be salvaged only for parts. Once a target is identified, the Atlas moves into position. The crew deploys the vehicle's spade, a large metal plate that digs into the ground to prevent the Atlas from being pulled backward by the weight of the vehicle it is recovering. They extend the crane, carefully positioning it to hook onto the disabled tank's tow points. This must often be done under fire, with enemy rounds impacting around the recovery vehicle, the crew working frantically to complete their task before they are destroyed. If the disabled tank has surviving crew, they may assist with the recovery, helping to secure tow cables or preparing their vehicle to be moved. If the crew is dead or evacuated, the Atlas crew must do everything themselves. This can be dangerous, particularly if the disabled tank is burning or if its ammunition is cooking off, exploding sporadically as heat reaches critical levels. The tow back to friendly lines is nerve-wracking. The Atlas must pull tremendous weight, its overcharged engine straining, its tracks digging deep ruts in soft ground. The recovery vehicle is vulnerable during this time, moving slowly, unable to maneuver quickly if threatened. Enemy forces may target the recovery attempt, recognizing an opportunity to destroy 2 vehicles instead of just 1. Reaching safety does not end the tank's journey. It must be evaluated by tech priests, who determine whether it can be repaired or should be stripped for parts. The evaluation is thorough, examining not just physical damage, but whether the machine spirit has been offended or corrupted by the violence done to it. Tech priests perform rituals of assessment, consulting ancient diagnostic equipment and their own communion with the Omnissiah. Repairs vary enormously in scope and complexity. A thrown track can be fixed in hours by a skilled crew. A damaged gun barrel must be replaced, requiring specialized tools and a replacement part that may take weeks or months to procure. Major structural damage to the hull might require cutting away twisted metal and welding in new plates, work that can take a team of tech priests and servitors days to complete. The field workshops where these repairs take place are themselves marvels of logistics. They must be close enough to the front lines to minimize the time spent transporting damaged vehicles, yet far enough back to be reasonably safe from enemy attack. They require power for welding equipment and machine tools, stockpiles of replacement parts, and teams of skilled workers. A major workshop supporting an armored regiment might employ hundreds of tech priests, engineers, and servitors, all working around the clock to keep the regiment's tanks operational. The work is dirty, difficult, and dangerous. Damaged tanks may have unstable ammunition aboard, creating the risk of spontaneous detonation. They may be contaminated with toxins or radioactive materials from the battlefield. The interior may contain the remains of the crew, bodies burned or torn apart, that must be removed before work can proceed. The tech priests and their servitor assistants perform this grim task with ritualistic detachment, seeing it as merely another aspect of their service to the machine god. Not all damaged vehicles can be repaired. When the damage is too extensive, when replacement parts are unavailable, when the machine spirit is judged to be too traumatized to continue service, the tank is condemned. Useful components are carefully removed, salvaged for use in other vehicles. The hull is stripped of anything valuable. Finally, what remains is either destroyed to prevent enemy salvage or left to rust, another monument to the brutal realities of armored warfare. The relationship between tank crews and the recovery and repair teams is complex. Crews appreciate the work that keeps their vehicles functional, that retrieves disabled tanks from the battlefield. But there is also frustration when repairs take longer than hoped, when replacement parts are delayed, when a beloved vehicle is condemned as beyond repair. The tech priests operate on their own schedule, guided by religious protocols that do not always align with tactical necessity. Smart tank crews cultivate good relationships with the repair teams. They offer respect and small gifts. They learn the proper forms of address and the litanies that please the tech priests. In return, their vehicles receive priority for repairs. Their requests for replacement parts are expedited, and they benefit from the accumulated wisdom of tech priests who have been maintaining vehicles longer than the crew members have been alive. The cycle of damage and repair becomes a grim constant in extended campaigns. Tanks are hit, recovered, repaired, returned to service, hit again. Each cycle of damage and repair wears on the vehicle, accumulating stress fractures in the armor, degrading systems that can never be quite returned to their original condition. Even the most careful maintenance cannot fully reverse the effects of combat trauma. Eventually, even the most storied vehicles reach the end of their service. They have been repaired too many times, taken too much damage, suffered too much stress to continue. The machine spirit may grow bulky and unreliable, or the hull may develop cracks that cannot be properly fixed. When this point is reached, the vehicle is either retired to a position of honor, preserved in a military museum, or as a monument, or it is finally scrapped, its components recycled into new machines. The recovery and repair system, for all its flaws and limitations, represents one of the few ways the Imperium actually attempts to conserve resources. In a military force that treats human lives as expendable, that launches attacks expecting 90% casualties, the fact that damaged tanks are recovered and repaired rather than simply replaced speaks to the value placed on these machines. A tank represents years of manufacturing time, rare materials, and irreplaceable STC technology. A soldier can be replaced by conscripting another body from any of a million worlds. A Baneblade cannot. This calculus creates a dark irony. The same military system that will order soldiers to march into certain death will move heaven and earth to recover a disabled tank. The crew that operates that tank is valuable only insofar as they can make it fight effectively. If they die, but the tank survives, new crew can be found. If they survive, but the tank is destroyed, they may be reassigned to lesser duties or even dismissed from service if no replacement vehicle is available. Yet within this bleak framework, the recovery and repair teams perform vital service. They are the reason that tank regiments can sustain operations over extended campaigns, the reason that a force that takes heavy losses in one battle can still field armor in the next. They are unsung heroes, working in the shadows behind the front lines, risking their lives not in dramatic combat, but in the unglamorous work of maintaining the instruments of war. Legends forged in steel. Among the countless tank crews who have served the Imperium, a few have achieved legendary status, their names known across sectors, their deeds commemorated in regimental histories, and taught to new generations of tankers. These are the aces, the commanders whose skill and luck allowed them to survive where others fell, to achieve victories that seemed impossible, to become symbols of what armored warfare could accomplish when executed with perfect skill. Knight Commander Pask stands foremost among these legends. Commanding his Leman Russ from countless battlefields, Pask has achieved a record of success that borders on the miraculous. His kill count includes hundreds of enemy vehicles, from light transports to super heavy tanks, and even titans. He has survived situations that should have killed him, emerging victorious from battles where his tank faced impossible odds. What makes Pask exceptional is not merely his skill at gunnery or tactics, though both are superlative. It is his ability to read the flow of battle, to be in exactly the right position at exactly the right moment. He seems to possess an almost supernatural awareness of the battlefield, knowing where the enemy will appear before they do, anticipating their moves and countering them before they can be executed. His crew speaks of his calm under fire, his unwavering confidence that steadies them when battle reaches its most desperate moments. Pask's tank itself has become legendary. Decorated with kill markings that cover nearly every surface, blessed repeatedly by the highest-ranking tech priests, the vehicle seems to bear a charmed existence. It has been hit countless times, but never penetrated, has fought in battles that destroyed entire tank companies, but emerged functional. Some whisper that the machine spirit of Pask's tank has been touched by the Emperor himself, that it cannot be destroyed while its commander lives. But Pask is exceptional precisely because he is rare. For every Pask, there are thousands of competent but unremarkable tank commanders who serve faithfully and die forgotten. And there are others who achieve moments of greatness before falling, whose stories are remembered within their regiments, even if they never achieve wider fame. There was Commander Weissermann of of the Koenig armored regiments, who held a critical bridge against an orc horde for 2 months with a single damaged Lehman Russ. His tank, Arethusa, was eventually destroyed by enemy air attack, but not before Wiseman and his crew had bought time for their regiment to establish defensive positions. Wiseman died defending his wounded crew. His body never recovered, but a shrine marks the spot where Arethusa burned. There was Major Corran of the Armageddon Steel Legion, who became one of the most successful tank aces during the Third War for Armageddon. Fighting through the ash wastes and industrial zones of that contested world, Corran mastered the art of urban tank warfare. His kill count exceeded 200 confirmed vehicle destructions, and his tactics were studied and emulated by other Steel Legion commanders. Unlike many aces, Corran survived the war and was promoted to command an entire armored regiment. The Vostroyan Firstborn produced Commander Alexei Dimetrin, a man said to have oil running through his veins instead of blood. Dimetrin never fully embraced the lifestyle of a guard officer, preferring the cramped interior of a tank to the relative comfort of headquarters. After the death of his superior officer, he commanded his regiment's tank squadrons from the cupola of the Baneblade Tundra's Bite, breaking an orc siege and saving his homeworld. His promotion to formal command was something he reportedly regretted, preferring the straightforward life of a tanker to the politics of high command. These individual stories, inspiring as they are, represent only the visible peaks of a mountain of service. Below them are the unnamed tank crews who fought just as bravely, who faced the same dangers and made the same sacrifices, but whose luck ran out before they could achieve legendary status. Every regiment has stories of crews who held impossible positions, who achieved impossible victories, who died preventing impossible disasters. There is a danger in focusing too much on the exceptional. The myth of the invincible ace, the tank crew that never loses, can create unrealistic expectations. Young tankers hear these stories and imagine that skill and courage alone can guarantee survival. They learn differently when they face combat for the first time, when they discover that even the best crew can be killed by a lucky shot, by mechanical failure, by simple chance. Yet the legends serve a purpose. They provide inspiration, proof that excellence is possible, even in the grinding horror of the Imperium's wars. They establish standards of performance, goals to strive toward. They remind tank crews that individual skill and determination matter, that even in a military system that treats humans as expendable resources, exceptional individuals can make a difference. The regimental traditions built around these legends create continuity and identity. A crew assigned to a tank named for a legendary commander carries the weight of that name, striving to live up to it. Units with proud histories push themselves harder, refusing to shame the memory of those who came before. This esprit de corps has tangible combat value, improving morale and cohesion. But the legends also carry a dark undertone. For every celebrated ace, there are crew members who served alongside them and died. For every victory that made someone famous, there were defeats where others perished. The focus on individual achievement can obscure the reality that armored warfare is fundamentally about coordination and teamwork, that even the greatest commander is only as good as their crew and only as effective as their supporting elements. The Imperium itself uses these legends cynically. The stories of great tank aces are spread through propaganda, used to encourage recruitment and maintain morale. They appear in recruitment posters, in imperial newsreels, in the speeches of commissars. The reality, the countless hours of maintenance and the brutal conditions and the high casualty rates is conveniently omitted. The legends become tools of manipulation, pretty lies that hide ugly truths. Yet for the tank crews themselves, the legends remain meaningful. They represent proof that survival is possible, that skill matters, that the Emperor protects those who serve with faith and courage. Whether these beliefs are true or merely useful fictions is almost beside the point. In the grim darkness of the far future, where life is cheap and death is everywhere, humans need something to believe in. The weight of memory. The psychological toll of armored warfare accumulates slowly, building up like sediment in a river, invisible until it becomes impossible to ignore. Tank crews face stresses that would break unprepared minds: the constant proximity to death, the loss of comrades, the guilt of survival, the endless cycle of combat and recovery. Some handle these stresses better than others, but none emerge unchanged. The first major psychological challenge is the violence of combat itself. Killing, even when done from inside a tank at a distance, leaves marks on the psyche. The gunner who vaporizes an enemy vehicle knows that they just killed the crew inside, humans not fundamentally different from themselves who had families and hopes and fears. The commander who orders their tank to crush enemy infantry under the treads must live with the memory of what that looks like, the sound it makes. Different crew members cope with this in different ways. Some develop emotional detachment, treating combat as a technical problem rather than a moral event. They focus on target acquisition, on shot placement, on tactical execution, compartmentalizing away any thought of the human cost. This detachment can be effective in maintaining combat performance, but it often comes at a price in their ability to connect with others, to feel empathy or compassion. Others cling to moral justifications. They are fighting the Emperor's enemies, defending humanity against Xenos threats and heretic traitors. Everything they do is necessary, sanctioned by the highest authorities, blessed by the Imperial Creed. This framework allows them to reconcile their actions with their values, to maintain a sense of rightness, even in the face of horrific violence. But this framework is fragile, vulnerable to the cognitive dissonance that occurs when the clean narratives of propaganda meet the messy reality of war. The loss of crew members creates trauma that can never be fully processed. When someone you have lived with, fought beside, trusted with your life dies, the grief is profound. But in the context of military service, there is often no opportunity to properly mourn. The crew receives a replacement, operations continue, the war does not pause for private sorrow. The survivors must push down their grief, function despite it, carry the weight of loss as an additional burden. This accumulation of unprocessed grief can manifest in destructive ways. Some crew members become reckless, taking unnecessary risks, perhaps unconsciously seeking death as a reunion with lost comrades. Others become overly cautious, seeing threats everywhere, unable to make the aggressive decisions that combat sometimes requires. Still others simply shut down emotionally, going through the motions of their duties, but losing any spark of enthusiasm or care. Survivor's guilt is endemic among veteran tank crews. Why did they survive when others died? Was it skill or merely luck? Could they have done something different that might have saved a comrade? These questions have no good answers, but they haunt survivors nonetheless. Some develop complicated rituals, believing that certain actions or prayers protect them. Others sink into depression, believing themselves cursed or marked for death. The physical environment of tank warfare contributes to psychological stress. The constant noise damages hearing, but also creates a background of stress, a sonic assault that never entirely stops. The vibration, the heat, the cramped conditions, the poor air quality, all create physiological stress that compounds psychological pressure. Sleep deprivation is chronic, combat operations often continuing for days with only brief opportunities for rest. Stimulants are widely used to maintain alertness, officially distributed in some cases, acquired through unofficial channels in others. But stimulant use creates its own problems: dependency, crashes when the drugs wear off, eventual degradation of mental function. Some crew members turn to alcohol or other substances to cope with stress, beginning spirals of addiction that the TSA military medical system is poorly equipped to address. The military culture around mental health makes it difficult for struggling crew members to seek help. Admitting to psychological problems can be seen as weakness, can result in removal from crew assignments, can damage a career. There is pressure to simply push through, to ignore symptoms, to maintain the appearance of fitness for duty. This pressure means that many crew members suffer in silence, their problems growing worse until they become impossible to hide. Commissars are supposedly trained to identify and address morale problems, but their methods are often counterproductive. The threat of summary execution for cowardice or desertion creates fear rather than resolve. Their ideological instruction rarely addresses the actual psychological needs of traumatized soldiers. Some commissars are more enlightened, understanding that maintaining morale requires more than threats, but these are exceptions to a generally harsh system. The better officers recognize that crew welfare affects combat effectiveness and make some effort to address psychological needs. They ensure their soldiers have opportunities for rest and recreation when possible. They encourage unit cohesion and camaraderie. They intercede with higher command to prevent their units from being ground down to nothing. But these officers can do only so much within a system that fundamentally views human life as expendable. Religious faith provides solace for many crew members. The Imperial Creed teaches that those who die in the Emperor's service are welcomed to his side, that their sacrifice has meaning and purpose. This belief can make death less frightening, can provide framework for processing loss, can offer hope of eventual reunion with fallen comrades. Chaplains perform regular services, hear confessions, provide spiritual guidance. But faith is not universal, and even among believers there are crises. How does one maintain faith in the Emperor's protection when your comrades die horribly? How does one believe in divine justice when the galaxy seems to reward the ruthless and punish the faithful? Some crew members lose their faith entirely, becoming bitter and cynical. Others develop more complicated relationships with religion, maintaining outward observance while harboring private doubts. The bonds between crew members, that brotherhood forged in shared danger, provide perhaps the most reliable source of psychological support. Crew members look out for each other, notice when someone is struggling, offer what help they can. This might be as simple as covering for a comrade who needs extra sleep, or as complex as talking someone through a crisis of faith or nerve. The crew becomes a family, with all the support and occasionally dysfunction that family implies. Humor serves as a coping mechanism, often dark and disturbing to outsiders. Tank crews joke about death, about the horrors they have witnessed, about the absurdities of military life. This humor is not callousness, but a way of processing experiences too terrible for straightforward discussion. It creates psychological distance, transforms trauma into something that can be shared and therefore made more bearable. But humor has its limits. There are experiences so traumatic, so fundamentally disturbing, that even dark jokes cannot encompass them. Witnessing atrocities, participating in actions that violate one's moral code, watching friends die in ways too horrible to describe. These experiences can break through all psychological defenses. When this happens, when the accumulated trauma becomes too much to bear, crew members break down in ways both visible and invisible. Some breakdowns are obvious. The crew member who freezes during combat, who cannot force themselves to pull the trigger, who simply stops functioning. These cases are usually handled swiftly. The individual removed from duty, either transferred to non-combat roles if possible, or, in extreme cases, executed for cowardice by zealous commissars. Other breakdowns are less visible but equally destructive. The crew member who becomes suicidal, who seeks death in combat, but in ways that don't obviously violate military discipline. The one who develops psychosomatic illnesses, their body manifesting the psychological distress their mind cannot process. The one who simply goes through the motions, functionally competent, but emotionally dead. The fortunate few who survive long enough to be rotated out of combat roles face their own challenges. The transition from the intensity of armored warfare to any kind of normal existence is jarring. The heightened alertness that kept them alive becomes hypervigilance in peacetime. The aggression that served them in combat becomes violence in civilian contexts. The bonds with their crew were the most important relationships in their lives, and separation from those bonds leaves them feeling isolated and adrift. The Imperium offers little support for veterans dealing with these transitions. Retirement from active service is rare. Most soldiers continue until they die or are too badly wounded to serve. Those who do separate from military service often find themselves unable to reintegrate into civilian life, unable to relate to people who have never faced the things they have faced. Many end up in positions on the margins of society, their service forgotten, their sacrifice unrewarded. This is the hidden cost of armored warfare. The price paid, not in blood and steel, but in damaged psyches and broken spirits. The tank that returns from battle may look the same as when it deployed, but the crew inside has changed in ways that can never be fully repaired. They carry the war with them always, memories that intrude at unexpected moments, psychological scars that never fully heal, yet they endure, because duty demands it, because their comrades depend on them, because someone must stand between humanity and the darkness. They climb back into their tanks, close the hatches, and advance once more toward the enemy. They do this not because they are fearless, but because courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. They do this not because they are inhuman, but because they are fundamentally, tragically human, capable of sacrifice and endurance beyond what should be possible. This is the brutal life of a tank crew in Warhammer 40,000. It is a life of contradictions, power and vulnerability, brotherhood and isolation, honor and horror. It is a life that grinds people down, that takes bright young recruits and transforms them into hard-eyed veterans who have seen too much. It is a life that most do not survive, and those who do are marked forever by the experience. But it is also a life of purpose, of serving something larger than oneself. In the grim darkness of the far future, where humanity faces extinction from countless threats, the tank crews of the Astra Militarum stand as a bulwark. They are not the perfect superhuman warriors of propaganda, but ordinary people performing extraordinary service under impossible conditions. They are the hammer that drives back the darkness, the steel fist of the Emperor's wrath, the armored defenders of mankind. Their sacrifice, their courage, their endurance in the face of unrelenting horror, these things matter. They fight not because they expect to win, not because they believe the war will ever truly end, but because fighting is what duty requires. And in that fight, in that refusal to surrender even when all seems lost, lies whatever hope humanity has for survival in a galaxy that offers none. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into the brutal existence of tank crews in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your support helps us create more content, exploring the grim darkness of the far future, examining the lives of those who fight and die in the Emperor's name, and bringing to light the stories that often go untold in the grand narratives of galaxy-spanning war. Until next time, may the Emperor protect, and may your armor hold against all that the galaxy throws at you.